Our gospel reading for this morning comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Listen for the word of the Lord. He entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today, salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." This is the word of the Lord. A couple of years ago, I participated in a children's worship service centered around the Zacchaeus story. There was a problem, though. There were no children present. The service was filled entirely with adults. So when the worship leaders attempted to lead the congregation in the Vacation Bible School rendition of Zacchaeus, a wee little man was he, they were not too enthusiastic about it. But eventually, through some coaxing, the adults got up, went through their hand motions, and by the end of the song, there was not a frown in the room. There was something pleasant about retelling this story in a way that brought us back to the fond memories of our childhood. Our text for today does have a feel-good story element to it. For one, it is a story that is familiar to a lot of us, and it also can help us recall fond memories of our childhood, like the adults in the worship service I attended previously. And the story itself is a happy one. In the previous chapters in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus has had, one might say, a difficult relationship with the characters that are wealthy in this time period on his way to Jerusalem. But our text for today tells a different story, where Zacchaeus seems to finally get the generous teaching that Jesus has been delivering this whole time. The wee little man is able to see. The poor are promised charity. And Jesus stays a while in Jericho. It feels good. But something is missing. Something is not quite right. If we look at the fine print, it is not all sunshine and rainbows. Because even though Zacchaeus and Jesus and our childhood seem to be happy about the outcome of Jesus staying with this man, not everyone is happy. In fact, they will tell you about it by grumbling. Don't get me wrong. I, like everybody else, enjoys a good grumble. When the Eagles are getting all the holding calls against them and the Cowboys go scot-free, I have been known to grumble. When the Wi-Fi connection cuts out at the perfect time, I have been known to grumble. And as Elizabeth can attest to, when I am at a restaurant and I have the perfect order, which includes a slight variation but not too much to ask for, and it comes back different than what I was expecting, I have been known to grumble. So yes, I have been known to grumble, and maybe you have been known to grumble too. The text for this morning seems to think that grumbling is a communal occurrence. When we hear someone is airing grievances in the Gospel of Luke, we expect to hear about the usual suspects. We expect to hear about the Pharisees, the scribes, or maybe even the apostles. But instead, this morning in this story about Zacchaeus, it is not the usual suspects or a particular group of people, but all who are grumbling. So we all grumble from time to time, and no time embodies grumbling more than when we are in the car. You can picture it. You settle into your seat, you buckle your belt, you look at the dashboard to see the clock, and you look back up at the windshield, and then you realize you have to look back at the clock because you're already 15 minutes late. So you're hustling down the driveway and off on the road at a pace you wouldn't normally drive at. And all the while you're coming up with excuses for your tardiness. When you hit the first red light, you start to plead with this inanimate object like it could hear you, and you hope that it would let you go. Once you see green, you push pedal to the floorboard, and as you are cruising along, you see a biker in the distance, and you are saying to yourself, there is no way that I'm getting stuck behind a group of bikers this morning. So you push past, and as you are careening around the corner to your final destination, a car that is bigger and brighter than what should be legal cuts you off, and you hit the brakes, you slam on the horn, and you think, or maybe even say, some not so nice words that you would be too embarrassed to admit later. You are upset. You're angry. You're disgusted. How dare they cut me off? We all grumble from time to time. And it always starts out as innocent banter, but somewhere in the middle of all this venting, it becomes too much. It takes a turn. It crosses a line. And we become lost. At some point in this grumbling, we become consumed with our negative view of the world and those in it, that we lose sight of the truth. We lose sight of what is really important. It is not hard for me to imagine being there with the crowd, excited to see Jesus on his way to Jerusalem, but ending up grumbling when things don't go our way. And it's not hard for me to picture Zacchaeus, too, who has to hear these grievances aired out against him in a public murmur that cuts to the bone of his self-doubt. Over the past couple of months of getting to know this church, I have been moved by the gifts shared in this congregation and outside of these walls. And as the new guy, I also have been aware of what might be easier for me to see for someone looking in versus someone looking out. I have noticed surprise when I speak of the unique gifts of this congregation. I have heard comparisons of us to them, or us to how we used to be, or how we aren't hitting the mark. I have gathered that this community has known grumbling from within and also from outside, and that this grumbling can lead to a sense of unworthiness, whether it is because of a painful past or an uncertain future, or whatever the reason is, there is some idea we are lesser than the others, or lesser than the ideal. I think the grumbling that we all know can point to a negative view inward that fails to see the reality shining outwards. Zacchaeus knows this unworthiness. He hears the grumbling of everyone around him. But Zacchaeus, he's a persistent fellow. I mean, he didn't even let genetics get in his way. In the beginning of the text, Zacchaeus is straining his neck and stepping on his tippy toes to see Jesus over the crowds. And when he realizes he is just too short to see on the ground, he doesn't give up, but climbs a tree. So when the crowd starts to grumble that Zacchaeus is not worthy to have Jesus stay with him, he again does not give up. Instead, he responds to Jesus while making sure that everyone who is doubting him can hear. He responds that he will give half of all his possessions to the poor, and if he ever harmed anyone, they would be paid 4 times more than the harm was worth. There's no telling how the crowds were going to respond to Zacchaeus' valiant effort. But what changes in the story, what turns the whole narrative upside down, what tips Zacchaeus' apparent unworthiness over the edge into recognizing his worth, are Jesus' words. Today, salvation has come to this house. Because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost. You will notice in this story that while Zacchaeus is straining his neck to see Jesus, Jesus is the one who saw him first. As Zacchaeus is earnestly watching to catch a glimpse of who this Jesus was, Jesus already knew Zacchaeus by name. And as Zacchaeus was trying to defend himself against all who thought he was not worthy, Jesus already found Zacchaeus worthy enough to stay at his house and declare him a child of Abraham. In this climactic moment where everyone gathers to listen to what this great teacher has to say, Jesus in essence says to Zacchaeus, you are worthy. Child of Abraham, you are worthy. You who were told you were not worthy, and maybe even thought it yourself, you are worthy. The story of Zacchaeus tells us many things about God, our world, and humanity. But the one thing that rings true for us today is that you are worthy. You who try so hard, keep trying. You who feel lost, know that you are already found. You who feel and hear the grumbling of others, you are valued. For as we are all trying to seek and find that thing that makes us whole, God has already sought after us and found us before we could even try. Friends, the text for this morning tells us that today salvation has come to this house. And we have 2 opportunities to recognize the work God is doing through us this morning. In a little while, we will offer our resources and talents to this congregation's vision of what God's love in this community is and is for the world. We will also have the opportunity to celebrate and welcome people who are committing to be new members of this body, to grow in faith and discipleship together. And we do these things recognizing full well the grumbling we feel stirring up inside us and coming from outside these walls, that our money and membership was not what it used to be, that the future power and influence of the church is unclear. But friends, I have seen evidence in this congregation of Christ's presence dwelling among us and working through us. I have seen worship that is so joyful and meaningful, it has moved people to tears. I have seen groups of all ages and classrooms of different kinds of people filled with laughter and comfort that is so needed in a world of hatred and division. I have heard many stories of decade-long friendships that have survived life's celebrations and challenges and even death. And I have worked alongside people who have given up countless hours to make sure people receive the basic needs they deserve. I have witnessed a loving community that I believe Jesus would like to stay in for a while. A community that is worthy of God's love. In our text for today, Jesus was not paying attention to what made Zacchaeus worthy before, or it may have made him worthy in the future. Instead, Jesus was proclaiming that today is the day where Christ comes to stay in our house. The time to dwell on God's presence and work among us is now, for Christ has already sought and found us. All we have to do is welcome him, celebrate the glorious work he is already doing through us, and follow where he calls us next. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.